Before it fell, the first wall was never silent. Even in peace, if such a word ever truly applied to Terra, it groaned. Stone expanded and contracted with the planet's ancient heat. Void shield pylons hummed like distant insects. Somewhere deep inside its bones, water pumps thudded in exhausted rhythm, pushing recycled liquid through veins of rusted adamantium. The wall breathed, and we breathed with it. We lived along its spine, not soldiers, not yet but laborers, conscripts, oath rolls, and the children of those who had died before their quotas were fulfilled. Generations stacked like sedimentary layers, each life compressed beneath the weight of the last. We were born knowing two things: the wall was eternal, and we were not. I woke to the sirens every day. Not alarms, sirens implied urgency. These were calls. Low funereal notes that seeped into dreams and pulled us upright whether we wanted to wake or not. We rose from iron bunks slick with sweat, our mouths dry, our joints already aching despite our youth. The air smelled of lubricant, old incense, and human closeness left too long without mercy. We woke to the wall, we used to say, not to morning, not to light. Terra's sky was a privilege reserved for the upper strata and the palace spires. For us, the world was corridors, gantries, and the endless curvature of stone disappearing into smog. Rations were issued in silence, gray nutrient bricks, stamped with the aquila, tasting faintly of ash and something bitter that lingered on the tongue. Hunger sharpened the senses. It made the wall feel closer, heavier, more real. Some said that was intentional. A hungry man listens better. Work rotations were posted by robed adepts whose faces we never saw. Only their voices reached us through Vox Grill-filtered, distant, already bored. Today, parapet reinforcement. Yesterday, stress fracture sealing. Tomorrow, corpse disposal if the casualty list demanded it. They often did. The first wall was old, older than most remembered. It had been raised in stages, expanded and thickened as threats evolved. Beneath its visible surface lay older walls, and beneath those, older sins. We patched over them endlessly, sealing cracks we were not permitted to question. When someone asked why a section needed reinforcing, the overseer would pause. Then the questioner would be reassigned. We learned. The wall taught us discipline better than any commissar ever could. It taught us that obedience was survival, and curiosity was a luxury for those who wished to vanish quietly. Punishments were efficient, public, and dull. Lashings for tardiness, nutrient reduction for mistakes. Execution only when an example was required. The irony was never lost on us. The wall that existed to keep horrors out was perfectly capable of producing them within. At mid-cycle, we rested. If rest could be called, sitting with your back against cold stone while reciting maintenance litanies under your breath. The stone was etched with names, some official, most not. Scratched initials, dates, prayers so old their languages had rotted into symbols no one could read anymore. I traced one once, my finger catching in the groove. "Don't," a man beside me whispered. "Older." One eye replaced with a crude augmatic that clicked softly when he blinked. If you read them, they remember you. I laughed then, nervous, thin. I do not laugh now. There were rumors even before the sky darkened. Supply routes disrupted. Orbital defense platforms running silent longer than scheduled. Astropaths screaming themselves into comas. The overseers dismissed it as static, as the strain of a galaxy at war. The Emperor protects, they said. Trust the plan. Trust was another ration that kept shrinking. At night, when night existed in the form of scheduled dark cycles, I felt it again, that pulse beneath the wall, a sensation not quite sound, not quite vibration, as if something vast were shifting its weight, slowly, patiently, far below. Others felt it too. I saw it in the way conversations died mid-sentence, in the way hands lingered on weapon tools they were not authorized to carry. Faith curdled into superstition. Superstition into fear. We prayed harder. We bled more willingly. We told ourselves the wall had endured worse. Above us, beyond layers of stone and void-shielded sky, fleets were moving. Trajectories were being calculated. Guns were aligning with mathematical devotion. Names once spoken with reverence were being rewritten as curses. None of that reached us yet. All we knew was work, hunger, and the growing certainty that the wall, our god of stone, was listening more than it ever had before. As if it knew something we did not. As if it were afraid, they told us the first wall was built in unity. That was the lie at its heart. The truth lay buried in the deepest strata, where the air tasted stale and the lights burned a sickly amber, as if even illumination had grown ashamed. Those levels were never mentioned in official catechisms. They existed only in maintenance. Schematics marked obsolete, and in the memories of men who did not live long enough to share them widely. The wall was born during the aftermath of Old Night, when Terra was a wounded animal gnawing at itself. Warlords ruled continents. Tech priests hoarded half-remembered miracles like jealous gods. Humanity survived not by nobility, but by endurance and treachery. The Emperor ended that age with fire. Or so we were taught. What they did not tell us was how many bargains were struck before the flames ever fell. The earliest foundations of the first wall were laid by hands that had already sworn allegiance to other masters. Some were forgiven, some were coerced, some were simply never given a choice. Their knowledge of pre-unification fortifications was too valuable to discard. Their loyalty was negotiable. The stone remembers that. I know this because my great-grandmother worked the vault seals. She told me once in a whisper meant for dying years that the wall had been poured over bones, not just corpses, mass graves. Entire enclaves that resisted compliance were flattened, the ruins entombed as load-bearing substructure. Faster that way, her overseer had said. Stronger too. Fear sets hard. When she spoke of it, her hands shook so badly she spilled her ration water. She was executed 3 weeks later for sedition. In the early years, the wall was not meant to defend against gods and demigods. It was meant to intimidate humanity itself, a reminder that Terra belonged to one will, one vision, one future carved by force if necessary. Its battlements were lined with guns pointed inward as often as outward. The first guards were not heroes. They were survivors. Men and women pulled from conquered armies, given armor and a choice that was no choice at all. Serve the wall, or die somewhere less useful. Many still wore the scars of battles they had lost to the Imperium. Some still carried old loyalties buried like knives beneath their oaths. There were revolts, small ones, doomed ones, a squad that turned its guns on an overseer, a maintenance cohort that sabotaged a lift shaft, a preacher who declared the Emperor a tyrant rather than a savior. Each rebellion was crushed with mechanical efficiency, and each was recorded, not as warning, but as data. The wall learned. Every failure informed a redesign. Every betrayal thickened the stone. Weak points were reinforced. Access routes were sealed or rerouted. The first wall evolved as a monument to paranoia, shaped as much by fear of mankind as fear of the stars. Ironically, that paranoia was never aimed in the right direction. As centuries passed, the story softened. The blood in the foundations became symbolism. The executions became necessary discipline. The wall's origin was recast as noble sacrifice rather than enforced compliance. It was easier to worship a clean myth than to live atop a dirty truth. By the time my family was assigned to its care, the wall was sacred. To question it was heresy. To examine its past was forbidden. And yet, fragments survived. In data slates mislabeled as scrap and half-erased engravings on support beams no one visited anymore. In the dreams of those who worked too long in the deepest levels, where the air was heavy and the stone sometimes felt warm to the touch. Those workers rarely stayed sane. One man, a cutter named Jarek, claimed he heard voices while reinforcing an ancient section near the wall's core. Not warped whispers, not yet but echoes. Shouting. Orders screamed in long-dead dialects, the sounds of people dying beneath falling stone. They're still in there, he told me, eyes wide, pupils blown. They never left. He was transferred the same day. We later heard that section collapse during routine maintenance, killing 12. The report cited material fatigue. No investigation followed. History, like stone, can be shaped, but it never truly forgets. The first wall had been born from betrayal, fear, and necessity. It had been strengthened by lies repeated until they felt like faith. Its earliest purpose was control, not protection. Perhaps that was why it failed when it finally faced an enemy that could not be intimidated. Or perhaps the wall simply recognized its makers in the approaching fleet, traitors meeting traitors, stone greeting its own reflection. Above us, the air grew heavier, as if the planet itself were bracing. And far beyond the sky we could not see, the War Master remembered Terra. We did not measure time in days. Days implied variation, change. Something different might happen. On the first wall, time was a loop. The cycle began with the sirens low, resonant, vibrating through bone rather than air. They drag us from sleep like hooks in the spine. Dreams shattered instantly, replaced by the familiar ache of existence. Eyes opened to dim lumen strips flickering against concrete ceilings, stained with condensation and old smoke. We woke to alarms, we said. Not because we were in danger, because we were property. Bunks folded away with a hiss of tired hydraulics. Anyone too slow felt the sting of shock battens wielded by monitors whose faces were hidden behind blank rebreather masks. They never shouted. Shouting was inefficient. Pain delivered without emotion worked better. I swung my legs down and felt the hunger immediately. It was always there, coiled and sharp, a living thing in the gut. Rations were calibrated to keep us functional, not strong. Muscle wasted slowly. Minds dulled faster. The wall did not need thinkers, it needed hands. Breakfast was a gray slab passed through a slot. We ate standing, chewing quickly, swallowing without tasting. The nutrient paste smelled faintly metallic, like blood diluted with water. Some said that was intentional, too subconscious loyalty through familiar flavor. No one joked about it. We filed out in columns, boots striking the deck in uneven rhythm. The corridors were narrow, designed to prevent congregation. Every few meters, Aquilas and purity seals glared down at us, their parchment edges curled, their wax seals cracked with age. The Emperor watched. He always watched. That knowledge was meant to comfort us. It did not. Assignments were announced as we marched. Vox grills crackled, voices distorted just enough to sound inhuman. Names were read, sections designated, casualty replacements noted with clinical detachment. Parapet 12 Beta, structural fatigue. That was my group. Structural fatigue was the wall's way of telling us someone might die today. The climb to the parapets took hours through lifts that groaned like old men and stairwells slick with condensation. As we rose, the air changed. Thinner, sharper, tinged with ozone from void shields cycling overhead. By the time we reached the surface level, my head throbbed and my hands shook from the cold. The wall, seen from up there, was vast beyond comprehension. Stone and adamantium stretched to the horizon, disappearing into smog and storm. Defense towers jutted upward like broken teeth. Gun emplacements lay dormant, their barrels angled toward a sky we were told was safe. Servitors shuffled along tracks, dragging cables and ammunition crates with mindless devotion. We worked in silence. Sealant was applied to fractures that ran like veins through the stone. Reinforcement struts were bolted into place, each impact of the tool ringing through my arms. Dust coated everything, our clothes, our lungs, our thoughts. It tasted old, as if we were breathing history ground into powder. Every so often, someone would stop. Just for a moment. A pause, too long, a stare into nothing. The monitors noticed everything. I saw a woman named Kara freeze, her hand pressed flat against the wall. Her lips moved, though no sound came out. When the baton struck her, she collapsed without resistance. They dragged her away, leaving a dark smear on the stone. No one asked where she went. We knew. Mid-cycle rest came and went like a rumor. We sat with our backs to the wall, feeling its cold seep through our spines. I closed my eyes and listened to my own breathing, to the distant hum of machinery, to that deeper rhythm beneath it all. The pulse was stronger here, a thrum that did not match any mechanical pattern I knew. It felt anticipatory, as if the wall itself were holding its breath. "I don't like it," whispered the man beside me. Young, new. His hands were blistered raw. "It feels wrong." I said nothing. Because he was right, and because acknowledging it changed nothing. Punishments punctuated the cycle like punctuation marks. A missed bolt, a cracked seal, a moment of hesitation. The wall demanded perfection from imperfect things, and it collected payment without mercy. Blood on the stone was wiped away quickly. Stains were bad for morale. At the end of the cycle, we descended again, deeper into the belly of the wall. Muscles burned. Throats ached. Minds drifted dangerously close to thought. Sleep came fast and without dreams, until it didn't. Lately, I dreamed of stone breaking, of a sound so loud it erased thought, of light pouring through gaps that should not exist, of voices screaming not in fear, but in recognition, as if they had been waiting for this moment. I woke from those dreams with my heart hammering and the taste of iron in my mouth. Others woke the same way. No one spoke of it. Routine demanded silence. Silence demanded survival. Survival demanded we pretend that tomorrow would be the same as today. The first wall encouraged that belief. It needed us calm. It needed us tired. It needed us ready to die without asking why. And far above, beyond our schedules and sirens, the sky was already changing. We just hadn't been permitted to look up yet. Power on Terra was never loud. It did not need to shout. It hummed. It vibrated through stone and steel, through the soles of our boots and the fillings in our teeth. It was present in the way doors opened before certain robed figures and remained sealed for everyone else. In the way orders arrived without explanation and were obeyed without question. Power did not announce itself. It assumed compliance. The first wall was not only a barrier, it was a machine. And like all machines, it required control, calibration, and sacrifice. Above the labor decks, beyond access codes we would never possess, the overseer strata operated from sanctified galleries. They watched us through lumen glass and aspects arrays, our movements reduced to heat signatures and productivity metrics. To them, we were not people. We were variables. Variables that could be adjusted downward. Each shift began with the oath. We stood in rows, heads bowed, hands clenched behind our backs while a vox-amplified catechism filled the chamber. The words were old, older than understanding, recited so often they lost meaning and gained weight instead. We spoke them not because we believed, but because silence was recorded as dissent. I am dust, I am duty, I am replaceable. The last line always caught in my throat. Symbols dominated every surface. Aquilus with wings spread in eternal vigilance, skulls wired into consoles, their eye sockets glowing faintly as data streams passed through neural remnants that had once held thoughts. Purity seals fluttered in artificial drafts. Their prayers faded, their promises unfulfilled. Faith was not optional. It was enforced. Executions were scheduled like maintenance. When one occurred, we were ordered to watch. Attendance was mandatory. The condemned were usually accused of sabotage, sedition, or spiritual impurity charges, so broad they could be applied to anyone on any day. Proof was never presented. Confession was extracted or fabricated as needed. The method varied. Sometimes it was the bolt pistol quick, efficient, merciful by Terra's standards. Other times it was exposure. A man or woman chained to an exterior parapet during shield cycling, flesh blistering under radiation while the wall loomed behind them, impassive. The message was always the same. This is what disobedience looks like. Oaths followed the executions. We were made to swear again, voices hoarse, eyes averted from the remains being hosed into drainage channels. The irony was thick enough to taste. Loyalty reinforced through terror. Faith maintained through fear. Propaganda saturated everything. Data slates played looping hymns, and battle footage Imperial fleets triumphant, enemies crushed beneath righteous fire. The War Master appeared often in older reels, standing beside the Emperor, smiling like a favored son. Those clips vanished one cycle without explanation, replaced by static and generic iconography. No one asked why. Chemicals were added to the water. Officially, they were supplements. Nutrients to combat fatigue, stabilizers to improve focus. Unofficially, they dulled emotion, softened panic, smoothed the edges of thought. Those who missed a dose by accident or design stood out quickly. Their eyes were sharper, their fear more honest. They did not last. The wall's machinery extended beyond steel and circuitry. It reached into our minds, shaping behavior through repetition and consequence. Ordinary chores became rituals. Cleaning a bolt became an act of devotion. Tightening a seal was framed as service to the Emperor's eternal will. I once watched a man weep while polishing a gun emplacement, not from pride, from exhaustion. He kissed the cold metal when he finished, whispered a prayer, and collapsed. The monitors recorded it as acceptable behavior. Emotional release followed by compliance. Efficient, and yet cracks formed even here. Orders began to contradict each other. Executions increased without corresponding infractions. Overseers argued behind sealed doors, their voices rising in tones we were never meant to hear. Foxcasters hissed with interference, sometimes broadcasting fragments of words that did not belong to any known catechism. Soon. Open. Remember, the skulls in the walls flickered more often now, their lumen eyes dimming as if distracted. Servitors malfunctioned, repeating tasks endlessly or freezing mid-motion, mouths open in silent screams preserved beneath layers of flesh and wire. The machinery was still running, but it was no longer certain who was giving the commands. Power depends on control. Control depends on certainty, and certainty was leaking out of the first wall like blood through hairline fractures. Somewhere deep in its core, something shifted. The machine that had watched us die all our lives was beginning to hesitate, and machines that hesitate tend to fail catastrophically. The first catastrophe was small. That was how it fooled us. A single Vox relay failed along the eastern curvature of the first wall. Routine, they said. Atmospheric interference. Solar activity. We were reassigned to repair it without ceremony or additional rations. The wall had endured worse than a broken signal tower. It always had. We climbed into the upper maintenance arteries, narrow passages where the stone walls pressed close enough to scrape armor and skin alike. The lumen strips flickered as we passed, casting everything in stuttering light. Shadows lagged behind us, stretching too long, bending at angles that made the eyes ache. The air smelled wrong, not the usual mix of oil and dust, but sweet, cloying, like rot masked by incense. Every breath felt thick, as though the atmosphere resisted being inhaled. "That's new," someone muttered. No one answered. The Vox relay chamber lay open when we arrived. It should not have been. The blast door was peeled back like soft metal, its edges warped, glistening, still warm. Inside, the machinery had not merely failed, it had ruptured. Cables writhed across the floor like severed veins. The relay spire itself sagged, its surface blistered with growths that pulsed faintly, as if breathing. One of the monitors vomited into his rebreather. The sound triggered something. The chamber shuddered. A low vibration rolled through the floor, stronger than the pulse we had felt before, no longer subtle or patient. This was hunger given rhythm. Then the whispers began, not through the Vox, through us. I heard my name spoken in my mother's voice, gentle and accusing. Others clutched their heads, screaming at nothing, tearing at their ears as if the sound were physical. Blood ran from noses and eyes. The lumen strips shattered one by one, plunging the chamber into red emergency light. Something moved in the walls, not machinery. Flesh scraped against stone from the inside, as if the wall itself were trying to birth something it had carried too long. The growths on the relay spire split open, spilling ichor that steamed on contact with the floor. It smelled of copper, bile, and scorched prayer parchment. The first man died without understanding why. A shape unfolded from the darkness, too many limbs, joints bending where they should not, its surface a mockery of armor and skin fused together. Its face was almost human, stretched thin over a skull that grinned with borrowed teeth. It spoke as it killed him, mimicking his voice perfectly. "I'm here," it said, while tearing out his throat. We ran, discipline shattered in seconds. Years of conditioning dissolved under the weight of raw terror. Tools were dropped, oaths forgotten. The monitors fired blindly, their shock batons useless, their last rounds scorching stone, but failing to slow what hunted us. The corridors betrayed us. Routes we knew twisted subtly, passages narrowing, angles wrong. Doors sealed just before we reached them. The wall guided us, not to safety, but into corners where fear concentrated, ripe and frantic. More shapes emerged, some more fragments of Imperial armor grown into their bodies. Others crawled on ceilings, dragging distorted shadows behind them. One laughed constantly, a wet, gurgling sound, as it stitched its own wounds shut with clawed fingers. Warp taint, the adepts would later call it. As if naming it made it less intimate, I remember the sound of bones breaking under pressure not meant for flesh. the wet pop of organs rupturing, the way screams cut off suddenly, mid-syllable, leaving only echoes and dripping fluids behind. When the alarms finally sounded, they were too late. Containment protocols activated, sealing off entire sections of the wall. Those of us trapped inside knew what that meant. Quarantine, purification, no survivors by design. I hid beneath a collapsed gantry, pressing myself into darkness while something sniffed the air above me, tasting my fear. It whispered again this time. Promises. Relief. An end to hunger. An end to work. All I had to do was answer. I bit my tongue until blood filled my mouth and stayed silent. Hours later, or minutes, time had lost meaning. The corridor was purged with fire. Promethium washed through the chamber, burning flesh, stone, and secrets alike. The screams returned briefly, then faded into the crackle of flames. Official reports called it a localized warp breach, a minor incident. The next catastrophe followed within the hour, then another. Across the length of the first wall, reality began to fail in different ways. Gravity stuttered, men aged decades in seconds, skin slowing from bone. Others fused into the machinery they were operating, screaming praise and terror in the same breath. Nightmares bled into waking life, and waking life proved worse. The wall was no longer holding things out. It was letting things through, and somewhere above us, as Terra's defenses unraveled piece by piece, the sky finally answered with thunder that was not weather. The siege had begun, and the first wall was already screaming our names. Weapons arrived before hope did. They always do. The armories of the first wall had been sealed for generations, their contents cataloged, sanctified, and rationed with obsessive care. Now their doors opened in sequence, heavy blast shutters retracting with the sound of tombs unsealing. Inside waited the tools of survival and of extinction, each one humming faintly, eager to be remembered. We were issued what they could spare. Lass rifles with power, packs older than our bloodlines, bayonets etched with prayers worn smooth by hands that had died centuries ago. Flak armor reinforced with ceramite plates, cracked but serviceable, each piece stamped with serial numbers that linked back to battles no one alive could recall. When I strapped mine on, it felt heavier than it should have. Not physically, symbolically. Armor in the Imperium is never just protection, it is identity. It tells the universe what you are willing to die for. The Aquila emblazoned on my chest felt less like a blessing and more like a brand. Some weapons were different. Artifacts pulled from deeper vaults, marked for emergency doctrinal deviation. Chainswords whose teeth whispered as they spun, their machine spirits agitated after long neglect. Power mauls that crackled with unstable fields, their energy coils glowing an unhealthy violet instead of proper blue. The tech priests who oversaw distribution moved with frantic precision, red robes stained with oil and blood alike. They chanted litanies of awakening, coaxing obedience from machine spirits that no longer trusted their masters. "Forgive our absence," one priest intoned, pressing his mechadendrites against a heavy bolter. The flesh was weak, the will insufficient. The bolter answered with a dull thump, as if clearing its throat. Symbols multiplied overnight. Purity seals were slapped onto armor without ceremony, wax still warm when it touched skin. Some bore prayers against corruption, others against despair. None promised survival. Skulls were hung from gun emplacements, their empty sockets filled with sensor arrays, watching both outward and in. Fear was now official doctrine. Rituals followed armament. We knelt in ranks as incense thickened the air, burning the sinuses and coating the tongue. A commissar walked among us, his boots immaculate, his eyes flat and precise. He recited the litany of acceptable losses, his voice calm as a ledger. "You will die," he said, not unkindly. "Some of you sooner than others. Your duty is to choose how useful your death will be." No one moved. That was good. Humor, when it appeared, was dark and brief. A man hefted his last rifle and muttered, "At least now they want us alive a little longer." Someone laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound that cut off instantly when the commissar's gaze found him. Even the weapons seemed to sense the change. Blast fire echoed differently now, sharper, angrier. Recoil felt more violent. Blades bit deeper, as if eager to prove relevance. In the hands of the desperate, tools become confessions. And then there were the marks. Some soldiers returned from skirmishes with strange alterations to their gear, scratches forming symbols they did not remember carving. Aquilas warped subtly, wings bending inward like claws. One man's helmet visor reflected faces that were not present. Tech priests declared them cosmetic defects. They were lying. I saw a guardsman refuse to remove a charm fashioned from broken cod teeth and human bone. He claimed it kept the whispers away. When an overseer tried to confiscate it, the man screamed and shot himself through the mouth before anyone could stop him. The charm kept its promise. Weapons, tools, symbols. They were meant to anchor us, to remind us who we were supposed to be in the face of annihilation. But anchors sink as easily as they hold, and many of us felt the pull downward growing stronger. The wall bristled with guns now, its silhouette jagged against a sky gone permanently bruised. Defense towers tracked targets we could not see. Auspex screens bloomed with contact icons, too many to count. Every weapon was loaded, every prayer spoken, every symbol displayed. And still, deep in the stone, something laughed softly, amused by how earnestly we prepared to die with meaning. The tools of war were ready. The wall was armed. And none of it would be enough. The wall did not fall all at once. It began to rot from the inside. Fear has weight. It presses on the chest, on the spine, on the small decisions people make when no one is watching. Under siege, the first wall became a place where every glance was measured, every whispered word tasted for betrayal. We stopped trusting each other before the enemy ever reached us. It started quietly. A ration crate went missing, then another. Someone was hoarding food or trading it. The monitors tightened patrols. Random searches increased. Men were dragged from bunks in the dark and interrogated under lumen glare, until they confessed to crimes they had not committed, just to make the pain stop. Those confessions were enough. Executions followed, faster now, less formal. Bodies were left hanging longer as reminders. The wall liked reminders. Desperation breeds creativity. Some tried to barter with the unseen. They marked doors with chalk symbols copied from half-remembered nightmares, hoping it would make the whispers pass them by. Others formed prayer circles, sharing fragments of faith like talismans, convinced that collective belief could still matter. It didn't. Tiny acts of kindness became crimes. I saw a woman slip half her ration to a younger worker whose hands shook too badly to hold a rifle. A monitor noticed. The woman was beaten until her ribs collapsed inward. The boy was forced to watch, then assigned to frontline duty without armor. Mercy, it seemed, was contagious and therefore dangerous. Betrayal flourished where hope died. Men reported their neighbors for imagined heresies just to draw suspicion away from themselves. Old grudges resurfaced, settled with a word to the commissariat. Entire squads were purged because one member hesitated during a loyalty oath. Paranoia was policy now, and yet resistance flickered. Not heroic, not organized, just stubborn refusal to surrender completely. A maintenance crew rerouted power from a secondary gun tower to keep a medical bay functioning one more cycle. A guardsman miscounted ammunition so a starving unit could keep fighting. Someone jammed a Vox channel just long enough for a warning to slip through before it was silenced forever. Small acts, punished brutally. I remember the night they caught the wall scribes, 3 adepts who had been altering casualty logs, removing names, delaying notifications, giving families a few extra hours before grief became official. When they were exposed, the punishment was public and inventive. Their tongues were removed so they could never falsify records again. Then they were ordered to recite the litany of truth. They tried. Blood made it difficult. Still, some went further. There were whispers of secret meetings in sealed maintenance alcoves, of oaths sworn without the Aquila present, of people discussing not survival but choice where to stand when the wall finally broke. That kind of talk was death. I was approached once. A man I barely knew sat beside me during a rest cycle, close enough that our shoulders touched. He smelled of oil and sweat and fear. He did not look at me when he spoke. "When it comes," he whispered, "will you fire inward or outward?" I understood the question. I did not answer. He nodded anyway, as if silence itself had confirmed something. 2 cycles later, I saw him again, wearing a different armband, his eyes bright with a fervor I did not recognize. The symbols stitched to his sleeve were wrong, twisted, almost familiar. He smiled when he saw me. That frightened me more than the screams. The wall had become a crucible, burning away pretense. Loyalty fractured into 1,000 definitions. Some clung to the Imperium out of habit, others out of fear. A growing few sought meaning elsewhere, anywhere that promised an end to hunger, to insignificance, to the grinding certainty of being crushed between stone and fate. Community did not vanish, it was weaponized. Every bond became leverage, every secret a blade. Resistance existed only in moments, in choices that lasted seconds before consequence arrived, like a hammer. And somewhere among us, traitors walked openly now, no longer hiding, convinced they had already chosen the winning side. The wall felt it. The stone groaned more often, cracks widened despite constant repair. Auspex readings spiked and fell without explanation. The pulse beneath our feet grew faster, almost excited. Something was coming. Not just an enemy at the gates, but a reckoning among those who had lived so long pretending they were united. The first wall was still standing. Corruption did not arrive like an invasion. It seeped. It came in the pauses between heartbeats, in the moment before sleep, when the mind loosened its grip on reason. It rode the static in Vox channels and the flicker in lumen strips. It wore familiar voices and promised familiar comforts. At first, it was easy to ignore. A word heard wrong, a shadow that lingered too long, a dream that felt more real than waking. The overseers blamed stress, fatigue, chemical imbalance. Extra supplements were added to the water, stronger sedatives issued before rest cycles. The whispers grew clearer anyway. They did not shout, they did not threaten, they explained. I heard mine while reinforcing a breach near the inner bastions. My hands were bleeding through my gloves, knuckles raw, joints screaming with every movement. The wall throbbed beneath me like a living thing under strain. "You are tired," the voice said gently. It sounded like me, not my speaking voice, my thinking voice. The one I trusted without question. "You have served enough. You owe nothing more." I froze. Around me, others worked on, unaware or pretending to be. The voice continued, patient, indulgent. "Do you know why it hurts?" it asked. "Because you were never meant to carry this alone." I bit down hard, tasting blood, forcing myself back into motion. The voice chuckled softly, as if amused by my effort. For others, the corruption took different forms. One man began to see colors where there were none, auras around people, shimmering with intent. He claimed he could tell who would betray us just by looking. He was right often enough that people started to listen to him. When he finally snapped and killed 3 men in their sleep, he said the colors had told him to. A woman started growing extra fingers on her left hand, thin and delicate like a child's. She hid them under bandages, crying when the pain became unbearable. A voice had promised her the growth would stop if she just let it happen. She let it happen. The fingers kept growing. Rituals emerged organically, without instruction. Candles arranged in patterns no one remembered learning. Chants assembled from fragments of prayers and profanity. Blood used not as sacrifice, but as ink. The wall responded. Stone softened in places, warm to the touch. Cracks formed symbols that hurt to look at directly. Lines sliding away from focus. Machinery began to behave as if it understood desire rather than command. Doors opened for the desperate. Consoles displayed messages no one had programmed. Soon, almost, opened the way. The most dangerous thing was how reasonable it all felt. Chaos did not present itself as madness. It presented itself as clarity, as an end to contradiction. The Imperium demanded obedience without explanation. The whispers offered understanding. Why suffer for a god who never answers, they asked. Some stopped resisting. They began to wear their changes openly etched skin, altered eyes, voices harmonizing with unseen choirs. They spoke of inevitability, of destiny unfolding as it always should have. They called it ascension. The commissars noticed too late. Bolt rounds solved some problems, not all. Killing a body did not silence the influence. Sometimes it spread faster afterward, like spores released by impact. Executions became messy. The dead did not always stay that way. I watched a man rise screaming after his head was removed, his body moving with frantic purpose until it was reduced to ash. The crowd did not panic. They watched. Something in us had shifted. Horror had become expected. Fear dulled into fascination. We were learning, adapting, finding meaning in the wrong places. Even the faithful were not spared. Priests began receiving visions, glorious, terrible revelations that reframed everything they had preached. Some declared the emperor a liar. Others declared him already dead. A few claimed he was watching and laughing. None could prove anything. The warp had reached through the cracks in the wall and into the cracks in us. It offered no single path, only choices that all led away from what we had been. I resisted as long as I could. But resistance is not a victory. It is merely delay. The whispers were no longer content to be heard. They wanted to be obeyed. And as the sky above Terra tore wider and the guns of the traitor legions found their range, the first wall began to answer back, not with silence, but with a voice of its own. Even as the wall trembled, legends were born, not in triumph, but in suffering. Names that would echo long after the stone itself crumbled. Some were heroes, some were traitors, some were madmen. Each lived briefly, burned brightly, and left a stain on Terra that nothing could erase. The first was Sarath of the Broken Hand, a young guardsman whose discipline had kept him alive longer than most. When the whispers began, he refused to bend. He labored on the parapets, repairing breaches under fire and screaming engines alike. One day, a section of the wall began to collapse under the weight of corruption, stone splintering and metal buckling. Sarath did not run. He ordered others back, held the breach with his body, and gave the wall the time to recover the machines of defense. When the debris fell, it crushed him entirely. His hands were visible, ripping the fractured stone, a silent oath even in death. They called him a hero, but those of us who watched knew the truth. He was just too stubborn to die quietly. His legend became a warning. The second was Mira the Whispered, a scribe who succumbed early to the warp's influence. She had discovered hidden passages beneath the wall and sought to communicate their secrets to anyone willing to listen. Her voice began to change, melodic and unnatural, harmonizing with the whispers that had haunted the corridors. She led a small group of workers into the depths, promising safety and purpose. Hours later, only echoes remained. No bodies, only the faint scent of sulfur and ink. Some claimed she had become one with the wall itself, her whispers eternally guiding or dooming the next generation. Mira's story was told in hushed tones, a mixture of fear and awe. The last was Brother Malchior, a psyker assigned to the inner bastions. He was a man already frayed by the pressures of duty, whose dreams were torn apart by visions he could not unsee. When the warp fully touched the wall, it spoke directly to him, showing paths of power, of dominion over flesh and stone alike. Malchior accepted. He became a conduit, part human, part instrument of the corruption spreading like rot. Some said he could move walls, tear sections open with thought, summon shapes from the deep fissures. Others whispered he was already dead, his body a husk while his mind wandered eternally in the shadows. He became a warning for those tempted by power. The wall offers everything and takes more than you can bear. Each legend shaped the living. The dead inspired both hope and dread. We whispered their names as if repetition could protect us, though we knew repetition would not change our fate. Even the wall seemed to remember them. Sections near Sarath's collapse emitted heat and vibration long after repairs. Corridors Mira had traversed were often warmer, the stone subtly pulsing under hands that dared trace the marks she left. Malchior's influence lingered in the inner bastions. Lights flickered to his rhythm, and shadows moved when no one walked. These stories were small sparks in the consuming darkness, but they were sparks nonetheless. They reminded us of what it meant to act, even when the outcome was annihilation. They reminded us that, even under relentless oppression and the gnawing pull of chaos, some part of humanity endured. And yet, they were also proof that survival often required compromise, corruption, or madness. For every hero, there was a traitor. For every martyr, a coward who watched silently. The wall did not judge, It only collected the echoes of every choice, storing them in its bones like a record of suffering. And when the sky above Terra finally tore wide open, the echoes would cry in chorus. The first wall did not merely fall, it remembered every hand, every scream, every betrayal. We were part of its memory now, and memory is heavier than stone. The first wall was gone, not shattered, not broken, not even truly defeated. It had simply stopped. Its stones lay crumpled, fused with the bodies of men, machines, and something older, something that had never belonged to Terra. Dust choked the air. The scent of iron, smoke, and burnt incense lingered like a memory you could not shake. Silence pressed down on the survivors heavier than the sky ever had. A silence that screamed in the ears long after the voices were gone. I walked among the ruins, my boots pressed into ash, into flesh, into the warped remnants of tools that once symbolized control. The wall had once promised protection, order, permanence. Now it offered only weight, a tangible reminder that nothing endures. Not stone, not steel, not faith, not men. We had believed in obedience, in duty. In the Emperor, those beliefs had been stripped from us, peeled away layer by layer, until all that remained was raw, aching awareness of mortality. Corruption had not been a storm outside us. It had been inside, every whispered promise of relief, every vision of purpose offered by the warp, every small act of defiance that had seemed meaningless. They had been threads weaving us into the tapestry of the wall's undoing. And now, with the wall itself fallen, the threads were cut. We were exposed, scattered, unmoored. The survivors were few. Those who remained bore the marks of the siege, not just scars or missing limbs, but eyes that had seen too much, minds fractured by what could not be reconciled. Some wandered mutely, mouths moving as if repeating the litanies they had learned by rote. Others whispered secrets to the wind, secrets that may have belonged to the wall itself. I saw the ruins of the armories, weapons fused with stone and flesh, useless now yet still humming faintly as though remembering their purpose, the relics, the symbols, the implements of faith and death. They were meaningless in the presence of this final truth, that the universe did not bend to the will of men, nor to the machinery they constructed to enforce it. The warp still whispered, always. From fissures in the rubble, from the fissured earth of Terra, from the bodies left to rot where they fell, it offered no comfort now, only inevitability. And we, hollowed by labor, horror, and betrayal, could only listen. I remembered Serath, Mira, Malchior, the legends etched into blood and stone. They had acted. They had suffered. They had burned briefly in the world that demanded conformity and obedience. And yet, in the end, even their stories were swallowed by the enormity of loss. Faith was no longer a shield. Duty was no longer a purpose. Even the memory of hope felt like a cruel jest. All that remained was the weight of everything we had carried, compressed into a moment that stretched into eternity. The sky, finally unobscured, was a bruised black dome streaked with fire and ash. Ships of the Traitor legions drifted like predators, slow, deliberate, inevitable. And beneath it all, the planet groaned, as if grieving itself. I closed my eyes, tasted dust and blood, and listened to the echoes of every scream, every whisper, every betrayal. They lingered in my mind, in my bones, in the hollow place where faith had once lived. Nothing would be rebuilt. Nothing would be redeemed. Terra was not a world to be saved. It was a grave, and we were the witnesses, left to carry the weight of memory, of silence, and of all that had been lost. The first wall had fallen, and with it, the illusion of control. The universe did not weep for us. We only remembered. And memory, when it is all that remains, is heavier than stone. The end.